It began in chaos for them as for us. For them? Yes, for them, for the gods. Why the gods in the plural? At this late stage in human development, when the concept of morality has encouraged the acceptance of a single God in the majority of existing religions. Good and evil are the polarities of our scale of values, and they hardly admit of intruders into their single combat for our souls. So has the focus sharpened over the centuries, and yet not so fast. Human instincts have been similar ever since the first man rose off 4 feet to stand on 2. Socrates and Plato both spoke tirelessly about goodness, long before the church existed. To be good, said Socrates, you must first know what goodness is, and suggested that virtue is knowledge. Now, there's nothing for theologians to quarrel with in this. Altogether, in the absence of priests in our sense of the word, there was a huge burgeoning of philosophers against the background of the multiplicity of gods in ancient Greece. Philosophers with the universe as their canvas, and without as yet the worries brought about by the concepts of original sin and the enforced feelings of guilt which have come with monotheism. The gods, in the plural, were entirely free from inhibition, and as a consequence, in the wild abandon of their ways, they have contributed to the world of psychiatry and psychoanalysis in a way impossible for the more constricted piety of Christianity. The influence of the gods is felt all the way from the Oedipus complex to a Platonic relationship and back again by way of the Achilles heel. The Acropolis in Athens. The temple is the Parthenon, dedicated to Athene, goddess of the city. The ancient Greeks created the gods in their own image, but made them immortal, a natural dream of all creatures sentenced to eventual death at birth. These gods answered questions people could only ask. Who made the world? Is it destined to end one day? Where do souls go in the afterlife? Do they become immortal gods in their own right? At the dawn of the universe, the human imagination still had defined its limits. Look at their concept of the creation for a moment. It began in chaos. In the beginning there was chaos. Eurynomé, the goddess of all things, rose naked from the chaos and divided the seas from the sky, set the wind in motion, and released the forces of nature. She then caught the north wind between her hands, and the serpent Ophion emerged. Ophion coiled himself round the goddess Eurynomé, and they mated. Then she assumed the form of a dove and laid the universal egg. At Eurynomy's bidding, a iron coiled 7 times round this egg until it hatched. Out of the egg tumbled the sun and the moon, the planets, the stars, the earth, all living things. Emerging from chaos at the beginning of time, Gaia, Mother Earth, married her own son Uranus, and they had a fruitful union and created a large family. Unfortunately, they didn't live happily ever after. Humans saw to it that the gods were of a higher realm. Well, they had to be to deserve the thousands of temples built to honor them. But although superior, gods were far from perfect. They were capable of every base act in human nature, often on an inhuman scale. With the first family, the first domestic drama took place. Uranus proved to be a very harsh ruler, unfaithful husband, wicked father, who threw his sons into the underworld. Gaia, their mother, was furious. She devised a plot against her husband, persuading her youngest son, Cronus, to rise against his father and cut off his genitals, the cause of all the trouble. Armed with a flint sickle, supplied, of course, by Gaia, Cronus surprised his father while he slept. Grasping his father's genitals with his left hand, he was right-handed, Cronus castrated Uranus and threw the genitals and the blooded sickle into the sea. It is nature itself, the raw force of the elements, which play the human imagination like an instrument. And when, exhausted, nature falls back into stillness, myths are born. The Greek landscape proved a perfect background to fantasy. Ever-changing, volatile, capricious, the gods could not be far away. Olympus is the highest mountain in Greece. On the borders of Thessaly and Macedonia, it rises majestic and awesome. Around these huge tiers of rocks, the gods gathered, feasted, and reveled. Homer, the epic poet who chronicled their life and times, wrote, "The gods' taste of happiness is as eternal as their eternal life." The gods didn't live in isolation on Mount Olympus. Oh, no. They were interested in mortals and amused by them. And whenever they felt bored, they invited a selected mortal or two to share their company. In Greek mythology, there are a quite remarkable number of gods and heroes. More than 6,000 names are mentioned in mythology. All this makes it difficult to follow, and certainly it's impossible to memorize all the names. But we do remember some significant personalities: Zeus, Aphrodite, Athene, Artemis, Apollo, Poseidon, Cronus, Ares, the god of war. The pillars of the temple of the god Zeus in the center of Athens. Worshipped all over Greece, Zeus was the almighty father of heavens. He carried a thunderbolt with which he attempted to keep heavenly order on Mount Olympus and mortal order on earth. Here the voice of Zeus can still be heard when the wind blows and the leaves rustle. But despite their sleight of hand and their conjuring tricks, the gods have some difficulty in detaching themselves from even the sleaziest side of human nature. Most of them are more than a little selfish, passing vain, unscrupulous in their search for the good life and the even better life, and boorish when they don't get their way. The father of Zeus, Cronus, the notorious mutilator we've already met, took over from Uranus, but turned out to be just as bad a monarch as his father. Cronus married his sister Rhea. She was the only one who'd have him, but she soon discovered he was afflicted with a very bad habit of swallowing his children, because some oracle or other had pronounced that one of them would dethrone him. When Rhea was pregnant with Zeus, she said to Cronus, "I'd like a short trip to Crete for some rest." Yes, good idea, said Cronus, thinking he'd swallow the child when she got back. And she went to Crete, and up in a cave in the Dicte mountain, she gave birth to a son, and then went back home. Her husband said to her, "How was your holiday?" "It went very well, thank you," and handed him a bundle of swaddling clothes in which she had hidden a large stone instead of the baby. And according to habit, Cronus swallowed the bundle, including the stone. In this way, Zeus was saved, enjoyed a happy childhood, and in due course he dethroned his father, who was weighed down with all those stones, establishing his own kingdom, and set free all of his previously swallowed brothers and sisters. A large and happy family was created overnight. The large extended dynasty was a crazy, unpredictable clan of mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, brides, grooms, mistresses, close friends, and rivals. And at the head of the family was Zeus and Hera. The tale of the marriage of Zeus to his sister Hera was a very complex one. Zeus, the infatuated male, tried to seduce Hera. It was winter, and he approached her in the form of a cuckoo and pretended to feel cold. He asked her to warm, comfort him. As soon as Hera showed her affection by cradling the bird against her breast, Zeus immediately reassumed his own shape and tried to take advantage of the situation. Hera resisted, eventually saying, "You want me? All right, but only if you promise to marry me." Yes, Zeus suffered the fate that millions would suffer thereafter, owing to his momentary infatuation, a lifetime of domestic strife. Zeus is the symbol of masculinity, and his amorous life is particularly rich in adventure. Among the recorded cases are at least 8 seductions of goddesses, 15 seductions of mortals. But of course, those were only on the rare occasions when he was caught. The king of the gods was also notorious for his wicked and treacherous tricks. He surprised his victims by assuming other identities. Disguised as a bird, animal, or cloud, he stealthily approached the object of his desire. Sometimes he took on the very appearance of a person closely related to the intended victim. The most outrageous instance of his particular trick occurred when Zeus seduced Alcmene. The ravishingly beautiful Alcmene was a most virtuous and faithful wife. Having already assumed her husband's appearance, Zeus employed yet another trick. He prevented the sun from rising for 3 entire days, and so prolonged the night of his tryst with Alcmene. The result of their union was Hercules, who became the greatest of all Greek heroes. Even though Zeus was the divinity responsible for protecting the sanctity of marriage, this didn't prevent him from having numerous affairs. One was with Leda, wife of the king of Sparta. On this occasion, the god transformed himself into a swan and sought refuge in Leda's arms. Enchanted by its beauty, Leda was full of tenderness and affection. Then, well, of course, the inevitable happened. Making love disguised as a swan must be unusual even by mythological standards. What followed, however, was less surprising. Leda laid an egg. And out of it sprang Helen of Troy. The major political event in Greek mythology is the Trojan War. This famous conflict between Greeks and Trojans is vividly described in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. 10 years of warfare for the sake of one beautiful woman, kidnapped voluntarily by a playboy prince of his time. Girls were particularly vulnerable in antiquity, especially when their giggling was carried on a malevolent wind. Can they be sure to this day that an innocent flower is not simply Zeus up to his old tricks, eager to procreate? I'm a convinced European. I live in the heart of Europe and have made it my business to know that our continent takes its name from a girl called Europa, daughter of the king of Phoenicia. Zeus spotted her playing by the sea, oh dear, with her girlfriends. Suddenly, a bull, its skin glistening brightly, appeared from a nearby field. It caught the attention of the girls, who, instead of running away, approached it and started stroking the bull. Europa, the most courageous of the lot, climbed playfully onto the bull's back. Well, this turned out to be an imprudent gesture, as the bull was, of course, none other than our old friend, the mighty Zeus, once more in disguise. No sooner was Europa on his back than Zeus flew away. A flying bull carried her over the sea to the island of Crete. There he seduced her, and from their union a future king was born, King Minos, who gave his name to a remarkable civilization 3,000 years before Christ, the renowned Minoan civilization. The Minoan palace in Knossos is one of the most interesting archaeological sites in Crete. King Minos inherited some distinctive characteristics from his father. He inherited Zeus's wisdom and, naturally, of course, his amorous nature. Minos seduced many women, fathered numerous children, and logically took frequent baths. Now, if the Greeks still maintain their seduction of Europe, well, we have to excuse them. It's a habit they inherited from the gods. The quarrels between Zeus and Hera were incessant, as is often the case between mortal husbands and wives. There were times when Zeus was too weary to fight with the volatile Hera, especially if others were watching. On such occasions, he could become unconsciously furious and invoke all of his Olympian rage. On one occasion, Hephaestus, their ugly, lame son, dared to intervene on behalf of his mother. Zeus grabbed him and hurled him down to earth. They say it took an entire day for Hephaestus to fall from the heights of Olympus. But this was an extreme case. Usually Zeus was more subtle in his ways of annoying Hera. He would seek love and affection in the arms of any charming person that happened to be within his vision, and this, no doubt, caused further quarrels between Hera and himself. Aegina is a small island off the tip of Athens. The name of the island goes back to early mythology, as is the case with almost any place name in Greece. The seas, the islands, gulfs, mountains, lakes, rivers, the cities, every inch of Greek territory has a name deriving from some mythological character or event linking the ancient to the modern world. Aegina was a nymph, a simple water divinity. Her father, the river god Asopus, had 20 daughters in all, but Aegina was by far the most beautiful, and as such she was certain to excite Zeus's fancy and sooner or later become his mistress. Well, of course, it happened. Aegina's father, outraged by the seduction of his daughter, pursued them. The lovers managed to hide in an isolated place without being disturbed, but eventually Asopus discovered them, and Zeus immediately transformed himself into a rock to avoid Asopus. Zeus then flew off to Olympus, and from there he hurled his thunderbolt down on Asopus, fatally wounding him. And transforming himself into an eagle, gathered up Aegina and flew her to this island, and still in the form of an eagle, made love to her. And to this day, Aegina's presence can be felt here. On the whole, river gods had difficult times with their wet and chattering offspring, the water nymphs. But what actually was a river god? Well, the ancient Greeks used to attribute divinity to their rivers, and they worshipped them. They believed that the rivers were the first kings of their country and imagined them as vigorous men with long and flowing beards. One of the many injustices of Greek mythology is that the victims are always punished and the gods always get off scot-free. But of course it's rather like that in life. Invariably the wife will stand by her husband and forgive him, while her attitude toward the other woman is absolutely merciless. And so it was in the case, the sad case, of Io. Io was a priestess dedicated to serving Hera, and in the course of her duties she excited Zeus's erotic interest. Of course, nearly everything in the landscape aroused his erotic interest. He studied her. She was a rather fey young girl, and he therefore appeared before her subtly in the guise of a cloud. Hera saw Io playing with a cloud and became suspicious. "What in the world are you doing?" Hera asked Io. To distract Hera, Zeus appeared before her as himself and immediately transformed Io into a cow. But Hera wasn't fooled. "Well, it may be only a cow, but it belongs to me now." And she got hold of Argus, a giant, and said to him, "Tie this cow to a tree and make her life very unpleasant." Zeus was horrified about what had happened, and he therefore got hold of Hermes. There was always someone at hand. There was a great interchange of help up there. And Hermes was the messenger of the gods, of course, and very good at burglary and other furtive employments. He was also a very good musician. And he went to Argus and began playing the flute idly in a corner. Argus, incidentally, was a giant with 100 eyes, 50 of which were always open. He was an ideal watch giant. And the flute enchanted him to such an extent that the eyes shut one by one. It was as thrilling as a modern countdown. 97, 98, 99, there goes the last eye, and then, of course, Hermes killed him with a boulder and took Io away and released her. But Io was not to escape so easily. Hera next sent a gadfly to sting the poor cow and pursued her to the ends of the earth. The stinging insect drove poor Io mad. She tried to get rid of it by leaping into the sea, and thus was the Ionian Sea named. Crossing seas and continents, desperately trying to escape her tormentor, she finally arrived in Egypt. And there Zeus caught up with her and restored her to human form. Soon after, she gave birth to a boy, Epaphos, who grew up to become the ruler of Egypt. For the ancient Greeks, beauty didn't distinguish between the sexes. And a god could be attracted by the beauty of either male or female without it in any way affecting his reputation. Ganymede was a male beauty and was singled out by Zeus's roving eye. Once again, Zeus transformed himself into an eagle, gathering up Ganymede in his claws and carrying him away to Mount Olympus. A beautiful boy like you, said Zeus, can live nowhere but among the immortals. It would be a privilege for me, sir, replied Ganymede, and he settled into life at the royal palace. There were no complaints from Hera on this occasion. A willing servant is always useful about the house. On Mount Olympus, Zeus reigned as undisputed sovereign. Father of both gods and mortals, he was all-seeing, all-knowing, and as a consequence, his immortality was often far from pleasant. Praised when things were going well, cursed when they were going badly, forgotten most of the time. In other words, a super god man could believe in. This is Peter Ustinov reporting on the big event of the day a few centuries ago. The entire Olympian kingdom is enjoying a unique moment of euphoria. Zeus, the mighty father of heaven, has just given birth to a healthy baby girl. He didn't need a nymph for that. He did it all himself. And everyone is congratulating. It wasn't exactly a baby, of course, because this one came into the world fully grown, fully clothed, and fully armed. The very depth of Olympus was shaken, and a terrible roar came out of the earth. "Ah," wrote the poet Homer. Undoubtedly, the newborn will join the pantheon of the Olympians. The name of the new goddess is Athena. We have further details of Athena's birth just in. It's said that early this morning, Zeus woke up complaining of a violent headache, celestial migraine. His howling was heard all through the palace, and it was so loud that the whole firmament echoed. Hephaestus, Zeus's lame son, who was by trade a blacksmith, tried to ease the pain by fetching a bronze axe to make a breach in Zeus's skull. From this breach sprang Athene with a mighty shout, and fully armed, of course. Athens, the capital of modern Greece, proudly bears Athene's name and enjoys the protection of the goddess. In the past, it was a city of elegant proportions and enviable beauty. Today, it's a huge metropolis, densely populated, but with traces of ancient glory punctuating its arbitrary growth. In our dreams, we can all be gods. Only the waking hour shatters that illusion. But then imagination takes over the work of dreams and can invent legends which men deem fit for gods. A stupendous beauty once rose naked from the Mediterranean Sea. It seems she was not a mere mortal, not even the survivor of a shipwreck, but rather a newly born goddess, her name Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. 3 gentle ladies of divine origin, known as the Horae, offered Aphrodite some assistance. They thought it quite indecent for her to be walking around as she was, so they dressed her in exquisite clothes. They placed a golden wreath on her head, adorned her with golden necklace, golden earrings, and scented her clothes with spring flowers. Wherever she walked, so it was rumored, grass and flowers sprang up instantaneously from the ground, while sparrows and doves fluttered above her. There is some mystery surrounding Aphrodite's conception, however. We've been told that it started when Cronus cut off his father's genitals and threw them into the sea, and from the foam that surrounded these objects, an unblemished vision of beauty appeared. Aphrodite. She explored the seas and finally beached on the far-off island of Cyprus. First love is always sweet. It was in the sea that Aphrodite enjoyed her first love with Neretes, a love full of passion and free of care. But the time had come for Aphrodite to leave the sea and take her place among the Olympian gods. She tried to persuade her beloved Neretes to follow her, but he preferred the sea. So she kissed him goodbye and transformed him into a seashell. Aphrodite arrived in Olympus full of promiscuous thoughts and provocative behavior. Rumor had it that even Zeus was often annoyed by her antics. She distracted him from his duties by putting amorous thoughts into his mind, so he decided to annoy her in return by inspiring in her love for a mortal. The unlucky mortal to attract Aphrodite's erotic attention was Anchises. He was a handsome young man, the son of a Trojan king, and the story is full of tenderness and passion. Aphrodite felt such love for him that she took special care before meeting Anchises. She bathed, she covered herself with perfume, adorned herself with jewels. She presented herself to him not as a goddess, but as a mortal. She told him she longed to be his wife, and Anchises took her to his room. They spent a wonderful night together. And in the morning, Aphrodite showed herself to him in all her divine radiance. For Anchises was terrified. For having slept with a goddess meant that he would prematurely lose his youth. The goddess of love reassured him that all would be well. She would bear him a son who would be godlike. Her only request was that he not mention their lovemaking to anyone. Anchises, however, had a moment of forgetfulness. He and his friends were exchanging jokes about their amorous deeds. "Whom would you choose as your sleeping partner?" asked one of them. "Anchises, a beautiful princess, or Aphrodite herself?" Well, I've slept with both, so the question's really not very pertinent, said Anchises. Zeus heard this, thought him a boastful braggart, and threw a thunderbolt at him. Aphrodite averted Anchises' death by changing the path of the thunderbolt. However, the shock was such that Anchises could never stand upright again, and this caused Aphrodite eventually to lose interest in him. Greek mythology doesn't often favor happy endings. These are the ruins of the old city of Paphos in Cyprus. Here there was once a temple to Aphrodite, where she was venerated as the goddess of love. Paphos, by the way, got its name from the legend of Pygmalion. Once upon a time, there lived in Cyprus, in the city of Amathus, a king named Pygmalion. It appeared that the women of Amathus had for some reason been irreverent to Aphrodite, and as punishment she turned them all into prostitutes. Well, rather than consort with them, Pygmalion preferred to live in isolation. But he couldn't escape from his loneliness, and so he decided to make a statue of a woman in the nude. He was an excellent sculptor, and he created an amazingly beautiful statue, which he named Galatea. Predictably, he fell in love with his statue and started talking to her and even cooking for her. Fearing Pygmalion was going mad, Aphrodite decided to breathe life into the statue. Of course, there were some malicious tongues which said that Aphrodite presented herself to Pygmalion in the disguise of a statue so that she herself might enjoy love with a man who hadn't been near a woman for years. They had some wonderful times together, and a child was born who was named Paphos. And the city of Paphos, to this day, bears his name. All the gods were infatuated by Aphrodite's beauty, provoking resentment and jealousy among their wives and mistresses. The first beauty contest was bound to end in tragedy. There were only 3 contestants, and they were all highly distinguished. To the left is Aphrodite, the goddess of love, Athene, the goddess of wisdom, and then Hera, the notoriously difficult wife of Zeus. Zeus asked Paris, Prince of Troy, to offer a golden apple to the fairest of the 3. Of course, Paris understood at once how risky it was to judge 3 devious and vengeful goddesses, but he didn't have the nerve to refuse the almighty god's request. Each of the contestants pointed to her own special qualities and made Paris some alluring offers, hard to refuse. I shall make you lord over all of Asia, said Hera. You will be victorious forever in battle, said Athene. Aphrodite was the last to speak. She lowered her eyes, loosened the clasp of her tunic, untied her girdle. Dear young man, what you need is a nice little bird to comfort you. Choose me, and you will have as your wife the most beautiful woman in the world. This so surprised Paris that he handed her the golden apple without really thinking, naming her the fairest of the 3. He would have been wise to stay with his perplexity forever, for without knowing it, Paris had just started the Trojan War. Although Athene was defeated this time, she was luckier in another contest, the famous contest that took place on the rock of the Acropolis. On that occasion, Athene challenged the god of the seas, Poseidon, It happened at the time that the gods were dividing Greece and the world among themselves. The challenge was that the god who could offer the best gift to the mortals would become the patron deity of the whole of Attica. Poseidon stood on this spot and struck the earth with his trident. A magnificent horse sprung out of the earth and began neighing immediately. "Ah, it's a nice trick," said Athene. She struck the earth in her turn, and an olive tree grew instantly. Athene won. Her gift was judged to be the more valuable. Poseidon left red-faced, and Athene remained to preside over Attica. And thus the olive tree became the symbol of sanctity for the Athenians. And she gave her name to the city, which was built at the foot of the sacred rock of the Acropolis. In honor of the goddess, Athens celebrated the so-called Panathenaea, a festival where all Athenians gathered to thank Athene for past favors and for favors to come. Every 4 years there was an even more spectacular ceremony called the Great Panathenaea. This included parades, special events such as athletic games, musical competitions, the sacrifice of cattle, a torch race. It is on these fabulous friezes of the Parthenon that we can see the Panathenaea immortalized. While Athene was worshipped in Attica, in the nearby city of Corinth, Aphrodite was also honored. As Homer said, "She was the one who gave birth to sweet desire among the gods, and held in bondage all the races of mortals, and the birds, and all the animals, and the monsters of the seas." In the cypress groves of Corinth, over 200 heterae, the women of pleasure and easy love, worked feverishly providing for the needs of foreign visitors. The money they earned went towards the maintenance of Aphrodite's temple. She was their patron, or rather their matron goddess. Aphrodite, however, was not only the goddess of illegitimate love, she was also a married woman. Up there in the royal palace of Olympus, Aphrodite lived with her beloved husband Hephaestus, the son of Zeus. Their marriage had received Zeus's consent upon receipt of numerous gifts. Whether Hephaestus was really beloved is debatable. In this improbable marriage, Aphrodite was unable to stay faithful to him. Well, it was not in her character anyway. She had many lovers, both immortal and mortal, and among these a very special love was ΑΡΗΣ, the robust, boisterous, and inebriated god of war. Aphrodite soon formed the habit of taking frequent trips away from Olympus, and she always had a particularly good excuse for doing so. She felt terrible at leaving her husband, but he would understand. Yes, Aphrodite spent many wonderful days and nights in ＡΡΗΣ palace in the region of Thrace. That is, until Hephaestus found out about the affair. He was absolutely furious. He hammered out a bronze hunting net so fine that it was invisible and unbreakable. He placed it on the 4 posts of their marital bed. I'm off to the island of Lemnos for a few days, he told his wife. Oh dear. This was the cue, of course, for Aphrodite to invite her lover Ares to spend the night with her. In the morning, they found themselves entangled in Hephaestus' net, unable to escape. In a rage, the deceived husband came into the room from next door where he had been all the time. He yelled accusations at the naked couple and called all the gods to come and see what a deceitful wife Aphrodite was. Out of a certain sense of delicacy, the goddesses declined the invitation. No, as did Zeus, surprisingly, who was disgusted with the entire episode. After all, it didn't concern him. However, all the male gods came, but instead of offering sympathy to Hephaestus, they laughed at him and admired Aphrodite's beauty. Hephaestus was so angry at this tone they adopted that he demanded from Zeus the return of all the marriage gifts. It was a very uncomfortable situation for everybody. Finally, Hephaestus was persuaded by Poseidon, god of the sea, to let them free. Aphrodite went back to Cyprus, and there, bathing in the sea, she regained her virginity.
There is a marvelous temple in the city of Athens, miraculously preserved, known as Thesion. The temple was dedicated to the worship of Hephaestus and Athene. You may well wonder about the relationship between Athene and the lame husband of her rival Aphrodite. It was Hephaestus who assisted Zeus when he gave birth to Athene. And as a reward for his midwifery, Hephaestus then asked Zeus for Athene's hand in marriage. Zeus refused, saying that Athene was destined to remain a virgin. There are other links between the two deities. Hephaestus was the master blacksmith who taught men engineering skill. He worked in iron and bronze with matchless skill, making armor and weapons. He constructed palaces and even foresaw the use of robots. They say that he made mechanical women out of gold to assist him in his workshop. As for Athene, she invented the chariot, the horse bridle, the potter's wheel, the plow, and the flute. All of Aphrodite's talents, on the other hand, were devoted exclusively to the pursuit of love. The love of Aphrodite for Adonis has been a favorite theme for poets and artists. Even at birth, Adonis was a beauty. Aphrodite became infatuated with baby Adonis and hid him in a chest. She gave the chest to Persephone for safekeeping. Curious, Persephone opened the chest, and saw the handsome Adonis. She decided to bring him up and keep him for her future lover. When Aphrodite found out about this, she claimed him back, but Persephone was unwilling to relinquish Adonis, so they had to submit to the decision of a court. The court decided that Adonis was to spend 1/3 of the year with Persephone, 1/3 with Aphrodite, and 1/3 by himself, free of sexual obligations. He obviously needed the rest. Aphrodite chose to ignore the court order because she wanted Adonis to herself. Persephone, however, was not going to stand for that. She ran to Ares, Aphrodite's notorious lover, for help, and the god of war turned himself into a wild boar, attacked Adonis, and gored him to death right under Aphrodite's eyes. Curiously enough, the story ended in a kind of serenity. Roses grew from Adonis's spilled blood, and where the tears of Aphrodite fell, anemones appeared. When Aphrodite promised Paris he would marry the most beautiful woman on earth, she couldn't have foreseen what was to follow. That very special woman was Helen, the wife of the king of Sparta. She left her husband Menelaus and eloped with Paris, the handsome Trojan prince. The Trojan War was the result. Naturally, Aphrodite couldn't possibly stay out of the fray. Paris was her favorite prince. Naturally, she was on the side of the Trojans and visited their camp, frequently. She wanted to beat her rival Athene, who was in charge of dirty tricks for the Greeks. And she paid for her choice. Throughout the Trojan War, while Aphrodite was wavering between jealousy and vengeance, Athene used all of her wisdom and inventiveness to help her favorite hero. Seeing the Trojans in danger, Aphrodite entered the battle and was even wounded by a Greek warrior. Well, she hastily retreated to Olympus, and Athene ran to Zeus and mocked her lack of courage. Zeus called Aphrodite to him, smiled and said, "You, my child, were not meant to concern yourself with matters of war. Go, attend to the sweet tasks of love." This was not the last time he would be obliged to mediate between Athene, goddess of wisdom, and Aphrodite, goddess of love. Being an ancient maritime nation, Greece has inherited many myths about the sea and nervous speculations about the whims of the god of the seas, Poseidon. Today, he happens to be in a particularly clement mood, but the merest frown will occasion sudden squall from any point of the compass. The links between religion and superstition are as intertwined as those between faith and doubt, or indeed between good and evil. The sea, covering more of the globe's surface than land, has a quite spectacular repertory of myths of its own. Myths which lead to both superstition and, or belief. All sailors worth their salt have tales of danger on the high seas, and it's always rewarding to listen to them, or it would be if I could speak a word of Greek. I think I heard a word there. Could it have been Poseidon, the name of the god of the seas? Before embarking on a sea journey, the Greeks prayed to Poseidon and promised to make offerings to him upon their safe return. Fishermen prayed that he protect their nets from being torn by bigger fish. In turn, they offered Poseidon the first fish they caught. We should point out that the Greeks were generous in their offerings to the gods. Having attributed to the gods a multitude of human weaknesses, they knew that in dealing with them, bribes could make all the difference. Poseidon is of great importance to Greek history. The Athenians attributed to him their naval victory over the Persians. They called him the Savior. At the tip of Cape Sunion, on a hilltop, stands a magnificent temple facing the sea. In this sacred place, the sea rises to the sky. This is the temple of Poseidon. It is believed that his mother Rhea saved Poseidon from his father's wrath. Cronus, as you may remember, was in the rather unpleasant habit of swallowing his children. And being a concerned mother, Rhea tricked Cronus and saved Poseidon by giving Cronus a foal to swallow instead of the newborn child. She hid Poseidon in the midst of a flock of sheep and entrusted his upbringing to the Telchines. According to mythology, these Telchines were the first inhabitants of the island of Rhodes. It was from them that Poseidon received the trident, his emblem and symbol. While he was staying with the Telchines, Poseidon fell in love with their sister, Alia. The two were wonderfully matched. They had an affair, and Alia bore Poseidon 6 sons and 1 daughter. Her name was Rhodos, after whom the island of Rhodes was named. The Zeus dynasty of the gods, the 3rd dynasty, had to overcome many difficulties before establishing its reign on Mount Olympus. The greatest of these was the fight against the terrible giants and titans. In truth, it was a violent struggle against the evil forces of nature. When Zeus fought the titans and giants, Poseidon fought at his side and killed them by hurling his trident at them. The 3 brothers, Zeus with his thunderbolt, Poseidon with his trident, and Hades with his helmet, ultimately triumphed in this struggle. Poseidon set free the Cyclops. The Cyclops were storm genies. It's said that the Cyclops actually gave Zeus his thunderbolt, and it's also been claimed that Poseidon received his trident from them, and not from the Telchines. Nobody is sure about this. What is important, however, is that Poseidon was now in possession of the trident, and that, like Zeus's thunderbolt, was a most dangerous and influential weapon. When the ancient Greeks saw fantastic shapes in the rocks along the shore, created by erosion or the impact of the sea, they claimed to recognize the marks of the powerful trident. And with this trident, Poseidon was said to be able to create turbulence in oceans and calm them into clemency afterwards. We are at Cape Tanaron, the extreme southern tip of the Peloponnese. All along the shoreline of Greece, Poseidon was worshipped. According to the ancients, even the mainland was merely a vast island floating on the sea. It's all the result of imagination in those who made up the myths. The breakers by a rocky shore are merely wild horses shaking their manes of white foam. Poseidon scudded over the rebellious water in golden armor, his chariot pulled by two of them. When the gods ultimately triumphed over the giants and the titans, the three brothers decided to divide the universe between them. Zeus became the god of the heavens, Hades, god of the underworld, and Poseidon, god of the seas. Olympus and the earth were to be shared by all, and often, therefore, became the battleground of the gods. It should be pointed out, however, that while all the other gods accepted Zeus's sovereign power, Poseidon often challenged it, especially at sea. Poseidon was a proud and independent god. He too had his palace on Olympus and owned another one deep in the depths of the sea. He led a vigorous love life, although not as obsessive as that of brother Zeus. Amphitrite was a Nereid. A Nereid is a beautiful creature of the sea, a woman-like deity. One day, as Poseidon was passing the island of Naxos, he saw Amphitrite playing with her friends. When the god approached her, she could only giggle, oh, these Greek girls. And when he proposed marriage, she stopped giggling, ran away, went into hiding. Poseidon found out where she was and sent Delphinus, a dolphin-like deity, to ask her to reconsider. Delphinos turned out to be a very good matchmaker indeed, and the marriage was quickly arranged. And to show his gratitude, Poseidon placed Delphinos in the heavens, high among the stars, yet another constellation, today known as the Dolphin. Poseidon's stories contain a remarkable number of monsters. Occasionally, he is their father, the result of unfortunate unions. Such an example was the Cyclop Polyphemus. Among Poseidon's offspring, there were many other monstrous creatures wandering around the mythological seas. In most cases, it's fear of the sea that has led the imagination to create such creatures. There are, however, moments of calm. Gentler aspects of the sea are conveyed in the nicer side of Poseidon, and these are wonders, such as when the dolphins make their appearance, the god's most beloved creatures. Sailors regard dolphins as a sign of good weather, and dolphins certainly embody all the beauty of the sea. When Poseidon was born, Rhea presented a foal to her husband instead of the newborn child. Thus, beginning with his birth, horses are mentioned in almost all of the myths related to him. Horses represent not only waves and breakers, but also torrents and even waterfalls. Intimately entwined with the symbolism of the horse is Poseidon's amorous adventure with Demeter. Demeter's daughter, Persephone, had recently been kidnapped, and in great anguish Demeter was searching for her. And during this time, Demeter was unlucky enough to bump into Poseidon, who became enraptured by her. She tried to avoid his amorous advances, but he was a very persistent fellow, especially underwater. She then had the bright idea of turning herself into a mare. As it turned out, this wasn't such a bright idea after all. Poseidon therefore turned himself into a stallion, and I don't have to tell you what happened after that. One was a lovely daughter, the other a son named Orion, who was slightly more equine than his sister. Orion wasn't actually a human being at all, he was a horse. A horse so fast that he could win any race. Most important, though, was that Orion possessed a rational faculty. He could even speak Greek, which unfortunately I can't, and nor can many horses. And then there is Pegasus. Pegasus' mother was Medusa. She was a terribly ugly creature with a head of snakes instead of hair. At one time, however, Medusa had been beautiful, and as such had not escaped Poseidon's attention. Rumor had it the actual sexual act was performed in a temple dedicated to Athena. When Athene heard of the sacrilege, she turned Medusa into a monster. And the offspring of her union with Poseidon was Pegasus, the famous winged horse of legend.
Homer calls Enipeus the most handsome river in the world.
Tyro, a lovely mortal girl, spent much of her time walking along its banks, daydreaming. Poseidon spotted her and decided he really must have her. And of course, he had a plan. He emerged out of the water where the river meets the sea and turned himself into the water deity Enipeus. He pulled her in with him. A beautiful blue wave enfolded them both. Homer describes the scene rather charmingly. Poseidon unfastened the girl's girdle of chastity and spread sweet sleep around her. He satisfied his desires, and clasping her arm, he said, "Woman, be joyous that I have made love to you. The love of the gods is never without fruit. Within the year you shall bear 2 beautiful children. Nurture them and bring them up wisely. Now go home and never again mention my name. For I am, dare I mention it, the mighty god Poseidon." Poseidon's offspring, if they were not horses or monsters, were giants. These fellows were wicked and capricious. They were scattered all over the Mediterranean, usually meeting violent ends. An example, the twin giants Otus and Ephialtes. At the age of 9, each was 9 fathoms high and 9 cubits broad. They tried to reach Mount Olympus by using lesser mountains as their stepping stones. And in the end, they killed each other in a fight over who was going to have the goddess Artemis. To show how truly dreadful Poseidon's sons could be, we have the story of Antaeus, another monstrous creature. He was the child of Poseidon and Gaia, Mother Earth. Well, nobody would expect anything normal to come out of that union. And thus the giant Antaeus was born. Antaeus managed to become king of Libya. Yes, he was vicious and he was quarrelsome, especially with foreign visitors. He ended all his speeches with the line, "All right then, come and fight me." Not that he was as brave as all that. In fact, he had his mother's support. Gaia had given Antaeus the power to absorb strength from her so long as his feet were touching the ground. Antaeus was almost always victorious and invariably killed his victims. They say that he decorated Poseidon's temple with the skulls of those victims. According to another source, he built the entire temple out of his victims' bones. Brave Hercules put an end to this particular horror story. He knew, of course, the secret of Antaeus' strength. He engaged the giant in a fight, and at the right moment, he lifted Antaeus from the ground and quickly strangled him, thus ridding the world forever of this particular horror. Of course, there were others. Poseidon was a handsome and virile god, but Zeus set a pretty high standard in subterfuge, and with that kind of rival, Poseidon was often forced into unnecessary complication. The affair with Aphrodite goes back to the notorious incident of her adultery with Ares. You may recall the scene. The two lovers trapped naked in an invisible net, and Hephaestus, Aphrodite's husband, summoning all the gods to take a good look at the shameful couple. Hephaestus demanded his marriage gifts back, but neither Zeus nor Ares were willing to comply. It was Poseidon who finally intervened. He offered to take upon himself the responsibility for the debt. In his foxy mind, he thought this was an ideal opportunity to win Aphrodite's favor. And he was right. She felt much obliged and willingly surrendered to him. The ruins of the royal palace of Knossos are a monument to the myth of the Minotaur. This creature, with a bull's head and a man's body, combining the disadvantages of both, was the result of Poseidon's punishment of King Minos. Minos, yet another son of Zeus, was challenged by the people of Crete to produce a sign as evidence that he was really the one chosen by the gods to reign over them. Minos prayed for Poseidon's help. Poseidon caused a splendid bull to emerge from the sea. The people of Crete took this as a sign and were duly impressed. However, Poseidon's instructions to Minos were to sacrifice the bull immediately after becoming king. But Minos was so pleased with the bull that he ignored Poseidon's order. Poseidon was offended and thought of an ingenious way of taking his revenge. He inspired in the heart of Minos' wife blind passion, uncontrolled desire for the bull. Even by mythological standards, it was quite unusual for a lady to propose to a bull. In a desperate state, Minos' wife consulted Daedalus, a skilled craftsman who promised to help her. He built a wooden cow with hollow insides, and Minos' wife concealed herself in the hollow. The cow was placed in a field where Poseidon's bull was peacefully grazing. The bull saw the cow and, as a result, a calf was born. It was, of course, the famous Minotaur. In and around Corinth, Poseidon is one of the oldest deities worshipped. According to one myth, he was once challenged by Helios, the sun god, for supremacy over the region. In the contest, a compromise was reached. Helios took over the hill named Acrocorinthus that overlooks the city of Corinth. Poseidon took possession of the isthmus and the adjoining shores. It was along these shores that the ancient Greeks celebrated the Isthmia, an annual festival of athletic, musical and artistic events. Among them, horse racing was the most celebrated. Samothrace is an island in the northeastern part of Greece. Both mythologically and historically, it's considered the oldest inhabited island of the Aegean Sea. And it was on top of the highest mountain of Samothrace that Poseidon placed his throne. And it was from here that he watched the Trojan War unfold. Poseidon had several motives for siding with the Greeks. His main reason was that the Trojans failed to compensate him for the construction work he did on the walls of Troy. The gods were usually forbidden to participate in the conflicts of mortals, but as the war raged on, Zeus was obliged to withdraw his edict. And Poseidon, venturing from his throne in Samothrace, intervened on the side of the Greeks. After their victory, he was horrified at the Greek cruelty to their defeated enemy, and so he decided to punish them. He pursued Greek sailors returning from their victories, and he sank their ships. As Homer wrote, "Awful is the fate of anyone invoking the wrath of the gods while sailing the seas." This is still true today, even if we no longer attribute the fury of the elements to the wrath of the gods. Like the sea itself, Poseidon was an unpredictable god. The stories of his adventures continue to fascinate all those in Greece whose livelihood is the sea. A green corn sprout, a tiny sign of life, little miracle. And it is from a shoot like this that the whole of mythology begins. The earth is the base of all Greek mythology, for it was the earth's abundance which caused the birth of the sky, and from there the origination of the universe followed logically. Here in Eleusis, only 20 kilometers from Athens, stands one of the oldest sanctuaries dedicated to Demeter, the goddess of the cornfield. And it was here that were conceived many myths concerning the goddess, who was also revered as the goddess of fruits and abundance of the field. Twice a year, a festival was held here. The first was held in spring, and the second was held in autumn. These are two significant moments in the cycle of the year, the planting and the harvesting of food. The festival was known as the Eleusinian Mysteries. Thousands of people converged on this area to celebrate the memory of Demeter, the goddess who offered mortals the precious gift of cultivation. Triptolemus was the hero to whom Demeter gave the first seed of corn, together with a wooden plough. She taught Triptolemus the secret of the earth, for it was to be his mission to teach mortals the art of agriculture and spread this knowledge around the world. The vast plains of Thessaly. The cultivation of wheat has been practiced here from the beginning of time. A famous king, Deucalion, ruled over these riches eons ago. His wife, Pyrrha, embodied the spirit of Demeter, becoming known as the Queen of the Harvest. It stands to reason that both identified with their subjects and were popular.
Many centuries ago, Zeus was disappointed by the behavior of mortals and decided that they really must be punished. But how to punish them? He pondered and pondered. Finally, he decided to unleash a flood to drown the whole confounded lot. Deucalion was warned about the coming deluge. He quickly built an ark. He took his wife Pyrrha, and they sat in the ark and waited. Soon it started to rain, and then it really rained. And after it rained again until the earth was entirely covered by water. It's the same story as that of Noah's ark. Deucalion's ark floated over the waters for 9 days and 9 nights. We don't know whether he met Noah on the way or not. But eventually Deucalion's ark came to rest on the top of Mount Parnassus, and Noah's on the top of Mount Ararat, out of shouting distance. Deucalion and Pyrrha disembarked and immediately offered a sacrifice to Zeus for having saved them. Zeus was delighted and sent Hermes, the herald god, with a message. Tell me what you want and it'll be immediately granted. Well, we are rather lonely, they replied. We would certainly love to have some company other than each other. Well, just use stones, came back the response, and so Deucalion and Pyrrha collected a pile of stones. You've done that? Yeah. Now throw the stones over your shoulder. They did so.
Deucalion's stones were transformed into men, Pyrrha's into women, and thus was the human race reborn. It was her friendly nature which made Demeter so vulnerable to the advances of more unscrupulous gods. Spring was in the air, Demeter was young in immortal terms, and had not yet been exposed to delusion. One day, an amorously inclined god caught sight of her. He was the supreme king of gods, Zeus himself, who always got what he wanted. Frightened by his advances, Demeter started to run away, but then decided it might be better to change herself into a cow. But Zeus, as always, was one step ahead. He turned himself into a bull. He knew that only a bull could detect the difference between one cow and another in a herd. The offspring of their encounter was a beautiful baby girl who grew up to become Demeter's beloved daughter, Persephone. As the goddess of motherhood, Demeter's maternal instinct was second to none, and her affection for her daughter knew no limits. Up on Mount Olympus, the children of Cronus represent the third dynasty of the gods. All of them have splendid palaces and travel frequently between heaven and earth. Hades, with his brothers Zeus and Poseidon, was the third of the leaders of the gods, but was rarely seen on Olympus. Hades was quite a mysterious god, for he was the master of the underworld. He reigned among the dead in eternal darkness, and his mood was, understandably, lonely and gloomy. It seems that Hades had adjusted to this rhythm of life, rhythm of death, in his kingdom, and this, I suppose, would account for the rarity of his visits to the upper world. There was never any certainty about Hades' whereabouts, for he possessed an extremely powerful method of making himself invisible whenever he wished, a magic helmet given him by the Cyclops. These were the same gigantic creatures who gave Zeus the thunderbolt and Poseidon the trident. There are supposed to be various secret entrances to the underworld. One well-known entrance is a black hole situated somewhere near the fierce rocky area of Cape Tainaron. The main entrance, however, is through the river Archeron in Epirus. According to the myths, the god Hermes used to escort the souls of the dead to the river Archeron, and in order to reach the entrance gate, the deceased had to cross the river by ferry, and the boat was in the hands of an old ferryman by the name of Charon. Tradition says that the deceased were obliged to pay an ovolos to Charon. The ovolos was the coin of least value in ancient Greece and was placed in the mouth of the dead. Charon appears in the oldest gallows humor story ever told. In this tale, a dead soul named Menippus refused to pay his fare. The story is told by Lucianos, a renowned writer of the 2nd century AD, in his satirical work, Dialogues of the Dead. "You have to pay me the fare, scoundrel," shouted Charon. "Only nothing can come from someone who has nothing," replied Menippus. Charon raged. "Is there anyone on earth who hasn't even got one single ovolos?" "I don't give a damn about the other people. I know I haven't got one," said Menippus. Charon lost his temper. "By Hades, I'll drown you if you don't pay me the fare." Menippus, already dead, was in the enviable position of laughing at death. "All right, you'll send me back," retorted Menippus. "Send you?" Frustrated, Charon was obliged to let Menippus pass free of charge through the gate to the underworld, the only recorded case of free access. There are very few recorded cases of Hades visiting the earth. One of these had a very upsetting consequence for Demeter and for her daughter Persephone. Persephone leaned down to pick a beautiful jonquil, which had been placed there cunningly by Gaia, the Earth Mother. It was, in a way, a family conspiracy. Gaia was Hades' grandmother, and even Zeus was party to this plot. Persephone reached out to the jonquil. It was a signal. In that instant, the earth split open, and out of the abyss galloped Hades. Reaching down, he seized Persephone, seated her in his golden chariot, and thundered away, taking her to his kingdom of the underworld. There were only two witnesses, Helios, who saw the scene, and Hecate, who heard Persephone's lamentations. Demeter was overcome with sorrow. She threw away all the ornaments of her hair, wrapped a black shawl around her shoulders, and flew like a bird over mountains, fields, and seas, looking for Persephone. For 9 days and 9 nights, holding 2 flaming torches, she wandered the universe. She neither ate nor drank. Finally, she met up with Hecate. Hecate had heard Persephone crying when she was being carried away by Hades. I heard Persephone's voice, but I didn't see her, and that's the truth, said Hecate. Hecate offered to escort Demeter to Helios, the sun, who knows all the secrets of gods and men. And so Demeter and Hecate, their torches alight, fled to Helios. Helios is the Greek name for the sun, the giver of light on earth, the illuminator. He drags the misdeeds of both mortals and immortals out of the shelter of darkness. Demeter asked Helios about her daughter. Zeus himself, the father of the gods, is responsible for your daughter's abduction, said Helios. He gave Hades permission to kidnap Persephone and to make her his wife. Helios described how Hades had taken Persephone to his chariot and carried her away to his kingdom of darkness, ignoring her cries. But Demeter, cease to mourn, said Helios. Your brother Hades has now become your son-in-law. He is not a god to be scorned. 1/3 of the world belongs to him. He's a king, and your daughter will now be queen of his kingdom. Oh, who cares about your wretched monarchs, said Demeter, furiously. I want my daughter back. That's that. Demeter decided to renounce her duties and withdrew from Mount Olympus. She was so sad and desperate, she neglected her beauty and her godly demeanor. She began to look like an old woman, so much so that nobody recognized her anymore. As a peasant among peasants, she wandered in search of her daughter. Finally, she reached the city of Eleusis, where Kallos, a wise and open-minded king, reigned. The wretched Demeter sat dejected on a sidewalk under an olive tree near the well of the virgins. The king's daughters came here to fetch water for the palace. When they saw Demeter, they said, why don't you come with us? You'll feel at home in the palace. You'll feel young again. They never suspected she was a goddess. She told them she was a victim of pirates who had abducted her from Crete. The daughters asked the queen to hire the old woman as a nanny for their baby brother. When Demeter entered the queen's chamber, a divine light spread around her. Fear and trembling overwhelmed the queen, who stood up and immediately offered Demeter her throne to sit on. Demeter rejected the offered throne. No, thank you very much, but accepted the post of nanny to the baby prince Demophon. The goddess took him into her immortal arms, nurtured him, and treated him like a god. It's not that surprising that mother who has just lost her only child turns out to be the best of all nannies. At night, she held the baby over the fire in order to burn his mortality away. for she had decided to bestow immortality on him. Fire is sacred in Greek mythology. Originally, only gods could use its magical powers. Prometheus, the Titan, stole fire from the gods and gave it to the mortals, a crime for which he was severely punished. The queen passed her baby's room one night. She saw Demeter holding the child over the fire. She cried out in terror. Demeter was annoyed. You mortals are so unwise. You can foresee neither what's good nor what's bad. You act foolishly and you bring upon yourself immeasurable trouble. The queen was stupefied. I do? I swear by the great oath of the gods, Demeter went on, that I was on the point of making your son immortal. You broke the spell now. There is no way he can avoid death. No. With that, the goddess regained all her Olympian composure and left the room, leaving the baby on the floor. Well, I suppose she's given her notice, said the queen to her husband. Now who will take care of my baby? I know I can't. But Demeter was still obsessed with her grief over Persephone. She wept and could think of nothing but the loss of her daughter. And in the end, all this grieving was not very much help. So Demeter decided to take action. A terrible year followed, a year of great unhappiness. Seeds didn't grow. In vain the farmers plowed their fields. The whole world edged towards destruction. Alarm bells rang all over Mount Olympus. Zeus sent his messengers to plead with Demeter to return home. The other gods tried to persuade her as well, but it was all in vain. Demeter was not going to return to Olympus, and neither would she let the earth bear fruit unless she first saw her daughter. Zeus decided that a compromise simply had to be reached, and he sent his messenger Hermes down to the underworld to negotiate with Hades for the return of Persephone. Hermes delivered Zeus's ultimatum. Return Persephone to Demeter, or we are all doomed. Hades turns to his wife. My dearest Persephone, go back to your mother. Go back to her in good spirits. Oh, don't be sad anymore. I'm not an unworthy husband. Please remember that you will always be honored here, and you will receive great offerings and sacrifices. And whoever doesn't believe this will be eternally punished. It was a nice speech, but beware, an evil plot has taken shape in Hades' mind. He kissed Persephone tenderly, caressed her, and gently gave her a pomegranate seed to eat. Hermes leapt into the golden chariot and took Persephone away with him. The flying horses couldn't be stopped, neither by the mountains nor the seas, and Persephone was in seventh heaven. When Persephone arrived in Eleusis, Demeter was in her temple. They fell into each other's arms. When the first emotional moments have passed, mother and daughter sat down to talk. They had many things to say to each other after such a long separation. Suddenly Demeter asked, "Oh, I hope Hades didn't give you anything to eat before leaving." "Eat? No, nothing. Oh, except, yes, just one pomegranate seed. Demeter turned white with terror. He who tastes the food of the underworld is doomed to return there for good. This was the law. And so yet again Demeter was to lose her daughter. Zeus decided that it was time to resolve this sorry story. Demeter was right to be angry, but now she had to be persuaded to be conciliatory. He sent Rhea, their mother, to Demeter with a proposal. Persephone was to spend 8 months of the year with Demeter and 4 months with Hades in the underworld. Demeter's 8 months started with the plowing of the fields and ended with a harvest. Demeter accepted the agreement and allowed the seeds to grow and the flowers to bloom, and once again the earth was fertile. The seasonal kidnapping and return of Persephone to her mother were the occasions of great festivals throughout Greece. These stones are the last witnesses to ancient rites of spring and to the orgies of the autumn. Another sunrise, no surprise in Greece. Golden days are the generous gifts of Apollo, the god of light. There is no other god who personifies the radiance of the sun more powerfully than Apollo. For Greece, so dependent on the sun, Apollo represents a divinity valued far above all the other gods. He is virtually the soul of Greece. The ancient Greeks called Apollo Phoebus, which means brilliant. He had other names too. He was Agenitis, the one who is perpetually being reborn. And he was Ekatevolos, the one who shoots his darts from afar. All these names refer to different characteristics of the sun, and Apollo possessed them all. Almighty Zeus once sent forth 2 eagles from opposite ends of the earth, decreeing that their meeting place would be designated as the Earth's navel. They met in the sky above Delphi, site of Apollo's temple. Apollo was illegitimate, as was the case with most of Zeus's children. His mother was Leto, one of Zeus's many mistresses, and she had given birth to twins. Hera, Zeus's wife, was furious at this latest infidelity and did not intend to make Leto's life easy. Leto wandered all over the world looking for a safe place to give birth to her children. Nowhere was she welcome, because everybody feared Hera's wrath. However, Poseidon, god of the seas, calmed the waters and led Leto safely to Delos, a small Aegean island so insignificant that it had little to fear from Hera. Leto was in labor for 9 days and 9 nights and in constant pain. Busy plotting her revenge, Hera had managed to trap Eilithyia, the goddess of labor and of childbirth, in her palace on Olympus. Iris, the messenger, was sent urgently to the royal palace to ask Eilithyia for assistance in the birth of Apollo.
Behind Hera's back, she promised Eilithyia a 9-foot-long necklace with golden threads, a lovely bribe, so long as you don't trip over it. So Iris brought Eilithyia here, to the island of Delos, and finally the time had come for Apollo to be born.
It was a birth truly worthy of a god. Apollo tore at his swaddling clothes, broke through the white mist. He appeared to the world in the midst of a triumphant light. Being the sun god, he grew up instantly and declared himself to be an archer, a prophet, and a musician. He acquired a bow and a lyre. He walked on the hilltops, and in celebration of his birth, Delos was covered in golden flowers.
By the way, Leto had an easy birth with Apollo's twin sister, Artemis. She was a healthy girl, later became the goddess of hunting.
Apollo was all of 4 days old when he felt impelled to undertake his first godly mission, to kill a monster called Python. Near Delphi on Mount Parnassus lived this terrible monster, a special favorite of Hera's, yes, a dragon-like serpent with a violent temper. Python terrified mortals far and wide. Carrying his celestial bow and arrows, Apollo flew from Mount Olympus and with his magical darts pierced Python's heart. "You monster, disappear into the earth," Apollo said to the dying Python. "Never again will you harm mortals, for you will be melted into nothingness by the bright sun." The serpent writhed in terrible pain. The Python gathered all its remaining strength and crawled into the forest and bled to death. Students of Greek mythology have many interesting interpretations about the origins of this story. Looking at Delphi, one can imagine how the story started.
Searching for outlets, the torrent moves in a spiral, just like a serpent, and eventually floods the fields. And then, of course, comes the summer, and the sun's rays dry up the river beds, and the python's blood irrigates the earth. You see, in any event, this is one example of how a myth can be created out of the forces of nature.
Ever-changing, volatile, capricious, it is nature itself, the raw force of the elements in which myths are born. Prophecy occupied a vital function in ancient Greece. And it stands to reason that oracles were consulted, obeyed, and feared. The Oracle of Delphi, speaking Apollo's thoughts, was consulted widely by those in perplexity, from ordinary citizens to reigning monarchs. If you assume that women were supreme in pronouncing prophecies, it's only natural to have a woman as the Oracle of Delphi. She was known as Pythia, and her power was without limit. She could dethrone kings, destroy nations. Pythia sat on a tall tripod and inhaled vapors from the depths of the earth. She would fall into a trance and then begin to talk and shout unintelligibly. Apollo decided that it was essential for the people to understand her. One day, Apollo shone his light over the sea and saw a boat manned by Cretan sailors. Using his gift of transformation, he turned himself into a dolphin and jumped on board, surprising everybody. He redirected the course of the boat, guided it to shore, and escorted the Cretans to his oracle. Thus, with Cretan volunteers, the oracle acquired its first priests, who were able to interpret Pythia's delirium and turn it into prophecy. The water from the Castalian spring was used in the purification rites at the temple, and mortals would stop and cleanse themselves before visiting Apollo's sanctuary. Water from Castalia was also given to Pythia to drink. It was said that this water gave her prophetic inspiration. Apollo's power of prophecy was not always well received by mortals. Cassandra, the daughter of the king of Troy, promised Apollo that she would become his lover on one condition, that he bestow on her the gift of prophecy. This he did, but Cassandra reneged on this agreement. Alas, Apollo had no way of retrieving his gift, for once given, the gift of prophecy cannot be taken back. Naturally, Apollo was furious. He looked for ways to eliminate Cassandra's new powers. And though it was not very elegant, he soon hit on a solution. He asked Cassandra for a farewell kiss, and as he leant over, he spat into her mouth. And this is the reason nobody believed her when she predicted the fall of Troy. Tempe is an impressive valley near Mount Olympus and is reached by the river Peneos. Nature has been kind here.
When he slew the monster Python, Apollo invoked the wrath of Hera, for he had killed someone very dear to her heart. Yes, Hera was fond of Python. In order to protect himself from her wrath, Apollo went on a self-imposed exile here in the Tempe Valley, a verdant place for exile, even if not self-imposed. And there are always the frogs for company.
During the time of his self-imposed exile, Apollo refused to partake in any of the privileges of the gods. His assistance to mortals during this time is remembered in the story of King Admetus. In order to marry Princess Alcestis, King Admetus had first to yoke a lion and a boar to his chariot. Apollo assisted the king in this exceedingly difficult task. When Apollo's self-imposed exile ended, he returned to Delphi and was crowned with a laurel wreath and given a laurel branch signifying his purification and cleansing. He was now a god to whom mortals could turn for repentance. The idea of spiritual cleansing was observed in various parts of Greece where Apollo was worshipped. On the island of Lefkada, for instance, each year a man who had committed murder was chosen to be a sacrificial offering to Apollo. All the sins of his fellow citizens were taken on by this single person. The sinner was thrown off the top of a cliff into the sea, and by this act the entire community's sins were purged. In reality, the victim was wrapped in a cloth, and attached to him were feathers and live birds to soften the fall. Below, boats waited to pick him up, guided, of course, by the divine intervention of the god. Apollo was blessed with eternal youth. His body was vigorous, he was broad-chested, slim-hipped. He was the ideal man for any woman. One might think that with all of this going for him, Apollo would be much sought after as a lover. Sadly for him, this was not the case. His pursuit of Daphne is a good example of this. Daphne was an exquisitely beautiful nymph, and despite what some people claim, she was also excessively chaste, if you know what I mean. She didn't give in easily to requests for male affection, not even if they came from a god. Apollo was madly in love with her, but she firmly resisted his advances. He was determined and eventually caught up with her. She tried to escape, but the god managed to seize her. Daphne called for help from Gaia, her mother, the earth goddess. The ground instantly opened, and Daphne disappeared into her mother's protected body. Where Daphne once stood, a laurel tree appeared. Daphne, which is the Greek word for laurel, became Apollo's sacred plant. A life for a laurel. Was this to be Apollo's fate? Not only Daphne, but most of the women Apollo pursued rejected him. Like many of the gods, Apollo admired beauty in both men and women. Apollo was the very first god to have a male lover. He fell in love with a beautiful youth named Hyacinthus. Hyacinthus was a Spartan prince and must have been very handsome and worthy for a god to fall in love with him. To complicate matters, Zephyr, the god of the west wind, fell in love with Hyacinthus too. Unfortunately, Zephyr was insanely jealous, and one day, when Apollo was teaching the young prince to hurl a discus, the wind caught the discus and made it change direction. It hit a rock, bounced back, and smashed Hyacinthus's skull. When Hyacinthus died, the blood from his wounds spilt onto the ground, and from the earth sprang the hyacinth flower. Whenever Apollo played his lyre, there was peace on earth and in the heavens. On Olympus, the gods forgot their quarrels, and Zeus laid down his thunderbolt. Apollo was very fond of his lyre, to the exclusion of all other musical instruments, especially the flute. This allergy began when the goddess Athene, who had invented the flute, wanted to demonstrate her skills to the other gods. Her playing was not bad, but she noticed during her concert that Hera and Aphrodite kept talking and giggling behind their hands. Athene couldn't understand their behavior. So immediately the concert was over, she took her flute and hurried to a neighboring stream to check her reflection in the water. She immediately realized why her rival goddesses were laughing. She looked totally ridiculous with her
with her lips puckered and her cheeks swelling up and her face turning blue. Mortified, she threw the flute away and laid a curse upon whoever might pick it up. The unlucky fellow to find Athene's flute was Marsyas. He was so excited when he discovered it, and also that he could create sublime melodies with it, that he went on tour of cities and villages. His performances were applauded everywhere, and logically he came to believe that he was a great artist, and dared declare that he was even more talented than Apollo. He challenged the god to compete anytime, any place. Apollo, provoked, decided to take immediate action. Yes, let's compete, he said, and whoever wins may inflict any punishment on the loser. A jury was formed, the contest began, and they proved to be equally talented. Apollo then challenged Marsyas to both play and sing at the same time. This was obviously impossible, and thus Marsyas lost the contest. As his punishment, Apollo had him flayed alive and his skin nailed to a pine tree. That was musical criticism at its most active.
Epidaurus is where the most celebrated Greek theatre stands. Today it is world-renowned for the performance of ancient dramas and comedies held here every summer. In earlier times, thousands came seeking help and treatment from the miraculous physician Asclepius. Asclepius had such divine knowledge and skill that it was said he could cure almost any disease. He was revered, and his sanctuaries rapidly spread all over Greece. The sanctuary in Epidaurus was the most famous. Asclepius was believed to be Apollo's son, and he had many of his father's better qualities.
There are different versions of his birth. One that tells of an amorous adventure of Apollo with a princess from Thessaly called Coronis. Coronis was supposed to be in love with Apollo anyway. They had an affair. But she was a frivolous young thing, and while carrying the god's baby, she decided to marry a humble mortal. Well, naturally, Apollo was affronted by this, and in a tantrum he killed her. But not before snatching the child from its mother's womb, and thus Asclepius was saved.
Apollo sent his newborn son to Mount Pelion in Thessaly. He entrusted him to the care of the centaur Chiron, a famous teacher. Centaurs are creatures that are half man and half horse. Chiron was the most distinguished of the centaurs and was considered to be the ideal tutor for gods and heroes. From Chiron, Asclepius learned the science of medicine and dedicated himself to saving lives. Apollo, in contrast, sometimes saved lives, but also took life away. His power, like the sun's beneficent rays, when too intense, could kill.
The theme of life and death is ever present in mythology. And the ancient poets tell us that Apollo would, on occasion, cause instant and sudden death to mortals. A heart attack, for instance, was interpreted as Apollo's decision to pierce a person with his arrow. And what is most curious about this deadly habit is that the ancient Greeks considered sudden death not as a misfortune, but as a blessing from the gods, an early release from the harsh conditions down here on Earth. Perhaps, in some cases, they had a point.
Delphi is now no longer the navel of the Earth. Once, a Byzantine emperor tried to reinstate Apollo to his former glory. But the world had already left the gods behind and believed it no longer needed the Olympians. The emperor asked the Delphi oracle for a prophecy. It was to be her last.
Είπατε το βασιλείο, χαμέπεσε δέδαλος αυλά. Ούκ έτη φίβος έχει καλύβει, ου μάντιδα δάφνη, ου παγάν λαλέουσιν. Απέσπε το γάρ και λάραν φίβαρ.
Tell the king, said the oracle, that Apollo has now fallen on evil times. He has neither altar nor laurels of his own, and the holy spring can no longer speak, for it has gone dry. The holy spring may well be dry, and the oracle unable or unwilling to answer questions. But Apollo's legend and the unfailing sun still shine on in Delphi. Nothing can ever change completely. Dionysus was one Greek god whose gift to mortals is appreciated to this day. Sitting here among friends, it's not difficult to dwell on the bright side of life. It's a wonderful day. The weather's perfect. The sun's shining, the food excellent. The wine, well, we're an hour's drive from the city of Athens. Greek mythology permeates this area, and Dionysus himself, the god of the vine, is present everywhere, especially in bottles. In this very spot, Dionysus presented the gift of wine to the people of Attica, and ever since to them, and indeed to the whole world, it has brought a spirit of, well, you know. Cheers to good wine. Today, the Greek landscape is rich in vineyards. This was not always the case. In the beginning, there was not a single vine. Only when Dionysus revealed the secrets of the grape that men were remarkably quick to learn and did winemaking spread all over the world. It is therefore only natural that Dionysus was a popular god. He represents the unadulterated joy of living. Early storytellers let their imaginations run wild to illustrate the impact of this new gift to mankind. According to one such story, Dionysus paid a courtesy visit to a king and fell in love at first sight with the queen. The king, being of a discreet disposition, excused himself, leaving the lovers alone. When he returned, Dionysus felt indebted and wanted to reward his discretion, so he taught the king how to cultivate vines and how to extract the precious liquid from the grape. The king was called Aeneas, and the wonderful new liquid was named Enos. Of course, not all stories connected with wine have happy endings, far from it. Let me tell you the sad story of another king visited by Dionysus, King Icarius, who was a kind old man with a daughter whose name was Erigone, and, oh yes, she had a dog called Maera. And one day, Icarius invited Dionysus to enjoy his hospitality. Dionysus was so pleased, he presented the king with a wineskin filled with a sweet-smelling liquid. With this gift, he added a vine stock with fresh grapes. Now, take this, my good man, said Dionysus to the king,
and inform everybody that a miraculous new drink is on the market. Walking near Athens, yes, in those days kings still walked, wineskin in hand, Icarius met some shepherds. Oh, hello, hello. I have something special I would like you to taste, he said. The shepherds tasted the wine. Oh, they loved it. But as they were unaccustomed to alcohol, they soon got drunk. Now, half of them fell asleep, and the others, in their alcoholic haze, thought their friends had fallen down dead. Oh, convinced that Icarius had given them poison, the shepherds killed him. Then later, when they came to their senses, because they sobered up, of course, they realized their mistake and decided to bury the body. Here we have an early tragic consequence of drinking too much.
Athens, city of the goddess Athene. And this is the theatre of Dionysus beside the Acropolis. In his time, Dionysus was worshipped and honored almost as much as Athene, the goddess of the city. Numerous festivals were held here each year in Dionysus's honor, the most important being the Greater or Urban Dionysia, during which dramatic performances were given.
Dionysus was what you might call a self-made god. This sounds strange, but it's nevertheless true. He was not automatically destined to be seen as a member of that pantheon of the gods like Apollo, Athene, Aphrodite, all the others who came to godship naturally. He had to overcome numerous misadventures and indeed persecutions before achieving Olympian status. He ended up, however, a major deity. One might almost call him a super god.
The circumstances of Dionysus' birth were peculiar, to say the least. Semele, his mother, was a mortal, a beautiful princess, and yes, she was another of Zeus's mistresses. And naturally, she soon became the object of Hera's wrath. To eliminate her rival, Hera persuaded Semele to request of Zeus an impossible favor. She persuaded Semele to ask him to appear before her in all the brilliance of his majesty. As no mortal could ever be allowed to see a god in this state, Zeus denied her request. Semele said that he obviously no longer loved her and therefore couldn't sleep with her. In anger, Zeus burst into thunder and lightning, and she was instantly burnt to death. But Semele was already 6 months pregnant, and to save his child from the celestial fire, Zeus performed one of his miracles, swiftly plucking the embryo from the mother's womb and sewed it inside his own thigh until the child was ready to be born.
When Dionysus was born, Zeus ordered Semele's sister Ino and her husband to take care of the baby. For the child's protection, Ino was told that the baby was a girl. Zeus hoped that Hera might be misled and not pursue it. But Hera was not misled. Her jealousy was unappeased, and she turned it against the young Dionysus' new guardians, driving Ino and her husband insane, and in their madness they killed their own children and then drowned themselves in the sea.
Once again, however, Dionysus was saved. This time it was Hermes who came to the rescue. He carried the child off to the nymphs, those amiable deities of the woods and mountains. He entrusted the baby to them on Mount Nysa. In another and even more dramatic version of Dionysus' birth, Apollo, the sun god, interceded. In this version, Hera again persuaded Semele to ask Zeus to appear before her in all the brilliance of his majesty, and in anger, Zeus again burst into thunder and lightning, and she was instantly burnt to death. But this time, it was not Zeus who saved the embryo, but our old friends, the Titans, who intervened and seized the baby. The Titans were friends of Hera, and it was believed they were acting on her behalf. They tore the child to shreds, boiled the shreds in a cauldron, and invited Apollo to the feast. He refused to partake. Instead, he took the boiled remains of the baby Dionysus and rushed them to his oracle at Delphi. Apollo placed the shredded remains of the baby carefully beneath Pythia's tripod in the temple, and it worked. Dionysus was reconstituted by a miracle, and from that time on, his gratitude turned into a lasting friendship with Apollo. Dionysus spent his youth on Mount Nysa. Nysa is actually a fictional mountain that may have existed anywhere. In Attica, Thessaly, Thrace, the island of Naxos, in Libya, Egypt, Arabia, even in India. But for the purposes of our story, we might as well say that Nysa is here. Dionysus grew up enjoying the freedom of nature, and he developed an uninhibited personality. In Homer's words, "When the nymphs finished with the upbringing of this worthy god, he wandered in the wooded ravines wearing a wreath of ivy and laurel on his head. All the nymphs followed him. He walked ahead of the chorus, and the noise they made filled the huge unending forest." It was during his early years in Nysa that Dionysus first invented the art of winemaking. And no doubt it was wine that produced the joyfulness and gaiety in Dionysus's companions. Well, it is true that after a few glasses of wine, most of us become a little boisterous, sometimes even noisy. But in the myths, Dionysus' behavior is depicted as a kind of madness, and was considered part of the revenge inflicted on him by Hera. It was time for Dionysus to set out on his long journey and earn his place among the gods. His travels were destined to be full of adventure and unexpected encounters. During a holiday in the Aegean Islands, Dionysus had a somewhat surprising experience. It all began innocently enough. Holiday time, beautiful sunny morning. He was walking on the beach, and he stopped to survey the scene, and suddenly noticed a boat coming in his direction, and it cast anchor, and the people came ashore. They seemed very agreeable, and they turned out to be pirates, and they captured him and took him back to the boat and set sail. And he remained calm, Dionysus did, calm and collected. When you're a god, after all, you're not particularly impressed by pirates, especially if they turn out to be stupid pirates who don't even know the difference between a god and a mortal. They tried to tie him up in many different ways. He always broke loose, as if by magic. Only the helmsman had the sense to realize the truth. Oh, my God, it's a god. It's an Olympian. Let him go before it's too late. It was too late. At that moment, an enormous vine, full of grapes, coiled itself round the mast and the sails. The ship suddenly was flooded with wine. The pirates were terrified. Too late. Dionysus turned himself into a roaring lion, seized the captain, tearing him into small parts.
At the very same instance, a wild boar charged from the other side, just to make doubly sure it was Dionysus again, with another personality. The only pirate to remain calm was the helmsman. Dionysus rewarded him with a pat on the back and a polite command. I say, would you mind steering back to the shore and putting me down there? Thank you so much.
Mount Olympus. Dionysus was ready to be received among the Olympians. First, however, he had to purify himself of all the transgressions he had committed. The purification of Dionysus is a cathartic moment in mythology. Rhea, Mother Earth, offered her blessing and embraced the young god, and through her embrace Dionysus was reborn. At that moment, according to the dramatist Euripides, the world was flooded with milk, wine, and honey.
Perhaps the most impressive of Dionysus' achievements on Olympus was his reconciliation with Hera. Reconciling with Hera is one of the most difficult things imaginable.
When Hera gave birth to Hephaestus, he was lame and ugly, and she was so ashamed she threw him into the sea. 2 water deities cared for him, and he became a very competent and talented blacksmith, specializing in jewelry and weapons. Living in a cave beneath the sea, he brooded about his mother. Suddenly inspired, one day he hammered out a golden throne and sent it to Hera. She was delighted and eagerly sat in it, but immediately realized that she couldn't get out of it. She was trapped. Around the throne, Hephaestus had wrapped an invisible, unbreakable net. The royal palace sent numerous messages to Hephaestus, but he was adamant. He absolutely refused to free his mother. This was the opportunity Dionysus had been waiting for. He flew down from Olympus and met Hephaestus in his cave. Dionysus had brought copious amounts of wine, and so the two of them talked and drank and complained about Hera. Finally, Hephaestus got so drunk, he agreed to return to Olympus.
Even when drunk, Hephaestus held his liquor well enough to haggle over Hera's release. He first of all demanded that he be allowed to inhabit Olympus, and then he went on to insist that he be allowed to marry Aphrodite. As for Hera, she was so pleased at being released. She removed all of her objections to Dionysus, and from then on, they were reconciled.
Now that he'd been accepted as a god, Dionysus turned his thoughts to marriage. He found his love on the island of Naxos. She was a serene beauty, and her name was Ariadne. On first seeing her lying on a beach, Dionysus thought she was dead, but she was merely sleeping. He sat down next to her, and while there, Ariadne had the sweetest of dreams. She dreamed that a handsome god was in love with her, and that he wished to marry her. But why was the beautiful Ariadne sleeping alone on a deserted beach? Ariadne was the daughter of the Cretan king Minos. He was the son of Zeus and Europa. Ariadne lived with her father here in the royal palace of Knossos. One day, the Athenian hero Theseus arrived in Crete on a mission to kill the Minotaur. The Minotaur was a horrible monster which Minos kept imprisoned in an intricately built labyrinth. No one on entering the labyrinth had ever been able to find their way out. Ariadne met Theseus, fell in love with him, and promised to help him kill the monster. She gave Theseus a ball of string by which he could guide himself through the labyrinth and find his way out again. And so Theseus slew the Minotaur. Theseus took Ariadne with him and left Crete.
The island of Naxos was a stopover on their journey back to Athens. But why in the world did Theseus leave Ariadne alone on the beach? Some say that Theseus wanted to be rid of Ariadne and left for Athens while she was asleep. Others claim that Athene ordered Theseus to leave without Ariadne because Dionysus had fallen in love with her. It's also been claimed that Theseus voluntarily offered Ariadne to Dionysus. The poet Homer, who sometimes liked to exaggerate, claimed that Ariadne had been killed by Artemis and that Dionysus married Ariadne after her death. Any of these versions may be true. What we do know, as an absolute fact, is that Dionysus found Ariadne sleeping or dead on the beach, and that he later married her. The marriage was held on the island of Naxos. After the ceremony, Dionysus escorted his wife to Mount Olympus. Zeus was enthusiastic about the new bride. After all, Dionysus was his son and Ariadne his granddaughter. All the Olympians brought wonderful gifts. Zeus presented the most precious gift of all. He made Ariadne immortal.
In his retinue, Dionysus had some special companions. First among them were the nymphs. They, you will remember, were the deities to whom Hermes entrusted the upbringing of the baby Dionysus. These forest deities possessed a delicate charm and beauty, and they would wander happily through the woods, dance endlessly, and fill the air with song. Occasionally, though, they turned themselves into stern forest rangers and punished any offenses committed against the trees and plants. Among his other companions were the satyrs and Sileni, who represented a peculiar kind of divinity. They had a human appearance combined with animal characteristics. These forest genii occasionally got into mischief and amused themselves by terrifying shepherds and travelers. The most famous among the Sileni was old Silenus. He was an extremely ugly, bald, snub-nosed fellow, always drunk, but extraordinarily wise. He served as Dionysus's tutor and helped in shaping the young god's character.
To complete Dionysus' retinue, we have the Maenads. These were his most devoted companions. They followed him wherever he went. They were usually crowned with wreaths of ivy and holding staffs tipped with pine cones. They dressed in a motley collection of animal skins. If you saw one of those, it was bound to be a Maenad.
The Maenads were the chief worshippers of Dionysus. This implied a single-minded pursuit of ecstasy, wild dancing, transcendent abandon, inspired by inebriation, were the chosen roads to their goal. A word had to be found to describe these elevations of the soul into illogical bliss and passion, and the word they found was orgies.
Dionysus' Sanctuary and Theatre by the Acropolis. It's of special importance to the Dionysian myths. It was during festivities here that ancient drama and comedy were born. For those of us who love the classical theatre, this place is sacred. It takes us back to the Athenian Golden Age. Dionysus inspired the ancient dramatists to create their masterpieces, and his spirit is present in the chorus of the tragedies, in the plot of the comedies, and very much in the satirical dramas. The ancient Athenians, seated exactly here, they could feel the presence of Dionysus, and they came to recognize him as a god
who showed them the way towards the sublime. At first, Dionysus was merely the god of wine. But thanks to his example, his hard work, he elevated his responsibilities to those of pleasure, well-being in general, and eventually became an indispensable, in his way, a supreme god. Will you allow me to propose a toast to our host, Dionysus? Stiniatou Dionysou.
Διονύσου.
Mortals have always been in awe of nature, and with good reason. While nature can be very beautiful, she is also at times dangerous and often treacherous. Early societies were right to fear their environment. With their limited knowledge, how else could they respond to the mysteries and the dangers of the universe? And so they had to find ways to appease the forces of nature and give themselves the illusion by mythology that nature was capable of being tamed. Even the winds were deified by the ancient Greeks. Boreas, the north wind, was boisterous and could be savage. He took pleasure in creating high seas, storms, seasickness, and danger. Boreas appeared to the focused eye of the mariner as a galloping stallion who had sired 12 mares, so nimble they cleared the crests of the snarling waves without even wetting their hooves. Artemis was Apollo's twin sister. Their mother, Leto, had been yet another of Zeus's incalculable mistresses. The beauty and cruelty of nature's laws are Artemis's province. The sacred altars to Artemis are usually found in the woods. She protected the flora and the fauna, and she supplied water when it was necessary. She also protected animals, especially wild animals. And she punished those who acted against nature. In our time, I imagine, she would have been a strong supporter of the environment. In fact, a green goddess. When we first meet Artemis, she's a 3-year-old girl sitting on her father's knee. Such tender moments are not uncommon in family life, here or there.
Daddy, dear, Daddy, please promise me. What would my darling baby wish me to promise her? I want to remain a virgin all my life. What?
Oh, the almighty Zeus was shocked. To remain a virgin in the Olympian kingdom was not an easy thing to accomplish. However, he was charmed by his little girl.
Your wish shall be granted.
Artemis pushed her advantage
and asked for a few additional favors. Give me a bow and arrow, as you've done with my brother, Apollo. Give me the right to carry a torch. Give me a short tunic with a red hem reaching just to my knees. They went into field my hunting. Give me 60 ocean nymphs to be my companions. Give me 20 river nymphs who will look after me when I'm resting after hunting, and who will take care of my hunting dogs. Give me all the mountains in the world and one city. I'm asking for only one, Daddy, because I intend to stay in the woods and the mountains hunting, and will seldom go down to visit the people. Zeus, doting father that he was, gave her all this, plus, 30 cities. Oh, you deserve them. Ha ha ha.
Zeus granted Artemis jurisdiction over all the mountains, forests, fields, streams, river banks, lakes, and springs. Artemis from then on became known as the goddess of nature. All over Greece, temples and altars were dedicated to her. Her sanctuary here at Brauron is among the most famous in antiquity.
Artemis was proud of the ease with which she was born. She was in the habit of repeating, "With my help, my birth was an easy one." She was so confident that she believed she could direct the course of her own destiny. Poor Artemis. Little did she realize that even she was just a messenger, and that in the mythological world, even the gods must submit to their preordained fate. This was the law. There were no exceptions.
Artemis was born here on the island of Delos. The island being small and insignificant, mortals on Delos had little to fear from Hera by giving Leto shelter, and Leto was greatly relieved. Artemis was born with great ease and assisted in the birth of her brother Apollo the next day. From the very beginning, she was an assertive little girl and had extremely clear ideas about her future. Artemis and Apollo carried out many of their activities together. Artemis, as skilled an archer as her brother, let fly with her deadly arrows at anyone who offended her, either by killing an animal that was sacred to her, or by boasting that he was a more skillful hunter than she was. When sheep or goats died, shepherds believed it was either Artemis or Apollo who had targeted their flocks. The twins were inseparable. However, as in all such relationships, there were inevitable conflicts.
Apollo, like all brothers, was bent on protecting his sister's chastity, though Artemis, obsessed with her own virginity, was in little need of protection. But there was someone she once fancied. He was not only handsome, but also a very good hunter. His name was Orion. Apollo rushed to Rhea, Mother Earth, to protest. What happened between them was not at all decent, he said. The man must be punished. Rhea sent an outsized scorpion to attack Orion. Orion fought back, but soon realized that the scorpion was unbeatable on Earth, and in order to escape, he dived into the sea.
Orion was a good swimmer and was soon a long way out. Apollo called to Artemis, "Can you see that point over there? I bet you can't hit it with your arrow." But of course, that challenge was too much for Artemis to resist. That was the end of her handsome lover. Artemis was deeply upset when she realized the trick that had been played on her. She arranged for Orion to be placed among the stars in the sky as compensation. Perhaps you've seen him. In winter nights, he is by far the most striking constellation in the northern hemisphere.
And now you all know how Orion got there, by swimming.
In the myths, the darker side of the gods is expressed by the occasional fury of nature. Zeus had scarcely put down the dangerous revolt of the Titans when he was forced to undergo a new struggle, this time against the giants. These monstrous sons of the earth had serpents in their hair and beards and serpents' tails for legs. They emerged from the ground in the Pallene Peninsula. To scale the heights of Olympus, the giants piled the surrounding mountains, one on top of another. When the giant Tityos attacked Leto, intending to seduce her, Artemis and Apollo turned their arrows against him, sent him to the underworld, where he was pegged to the ground, and 2 vultures ate his liver.
Niobe was the happy mother of 12 beautiful children, 6 boys, 6 girls. However, Niobe committed a fatal error. She boasted that she was a better mother than Leto, who had had only 2 children. For this insult, she was severely dealt with. Artemis killed the 6 daughters. Apollo pursued the 6 sons and struck them down one by one with his arrows. To put an end to her suffering, Zeus was kind enough to turn the poor Niobe into a rock.
Arcadia in the Peloponnese is a favored background for the nymphs, whose elegant and pastoral presence filled the environment with a particular serenity. One of them, Maya, was different from the others. Shy and diffident and disinclined to giggle, she lived alone in a cave, and it was there she was surprised by a visit from the ever-curious Zeus. "Anyone home?" The offspring of the visit was Hermes, the messenger of gods. Maya's newborn child grew up astonishingly quickly. On the very day of his birth, he went for a walk in the woods, and the first creature he saw was a tortoise hiding in the grass. Hermes carried the tortoise to his mother's cave, killed it, scooped out the shell with a chisel, and attached 7 strings made from sheep gut to it. With his tortoise shell lyre, he immediately started playing beautiful music.
Hermes was a precocious child, even for a god. On day 4 of his life, he established his reputation as a master thief by stealing 50 heifers, if you please, from the divine herd. Apollo, who was in charge of this herd, was particularly angry at this audacity, and when he discovered that it was his brother, Hermes, who was the thief, why, he took him to Olympus for punishment. Zeus, not willing to believe that this newly born son was already a thief, encouraged him to plead not guilty. Apollo, however, was not placated.
Hermes, already aware of Apollo's vanity, instinctively picked up his tortoise lyre and began to sing his brother's praises with his new instrument. Apollo was flattered. Hermes turned to his brother and said cunningly, "You like it, don't you? Take it as a gift. Use it to entertain mortals and immortals. I'm sure you'll be good at it." Apollo eagerly reached for the lyre, but Hermes, this 4-day-old child, quickly added, "Shouldn't you give me a gift in exchange?" And so it was that Apollo became the god of music and Hermes the protector of herds and flocks. Mount Kithaeron is a magical place, with deep forests, shady groves, bubbling rivers, and a green valley. It was Artemis's favorite haunt. Here she enjoyed life with her devoted companions, the nymphs. As I understand it, nymphs are the ancestors of the good and bad fairies in those childhood tales that so touched our hearts when we were small. The nymphs are ethereal creatures. They're joyful, delicate, oh, and exquisitely beautiful. The river nymphs were fun-loving, but not especially bright. They often fell madly in love with handsome young shepherds and bore their offspring. We can still see them in the morning dew on spring flowers, moist grass, lakes adorned with water lilies, and in crystal spring waters. Artemis expected her nymphs to be as pure and chaste as she was. Callisto was a serene and beautiful nymph who had no intention of violating Artemis's wishes, but Zeus had other ideas. Taking on the form of Artemis herself, he seduced poor Callisto. Artemis noticed that Callisto was pregnant and was furious. Artemis changed her into a bear. Callisto could have been hunted to death, but Zeus swept her up to Olympus, out of range of Artemis's lethal arrows. As representatives of the gentler side of nature, the nymphs were vulnerable to the whims of the gods. There was a charming young nymph called Echo, who was engaged by Zeus to distract Hera's attention whenever he wished to pay court to some pretty female or other. She was a talented storyteller, this Echo, and had an exquisite singing voice, and Hera was delighted with her visits. But after each visit, a new infidelity was recorded in the log she kept of her husband's waywardness. It was just too much of a coincidence. When she found out what was going on, Hera was furious with Echo. "You took me in with your storytelling, but from now on, you'll be deprived of the gift of speech. You'll only be able to repeat the last syllable of words you hear. But this is not speech, this is an echo," said the poor Echo in despair. "Right. It is an echo," said Hera, and abruptly left the nymph speechless. Speechless. As she was now deprived of speech, Echo couldn't even declare her feelings when she fell in love with a young man called Narcissus, and so he ignored her. Echo was miserable and hid in a cave. She died of a broken heart, her bones turned into stone, and all that was left of her was a mere echo, echo. It may well be that it was Narcissus' hard-heartedness that turned Echo into stone. So he too was punished. Zeus thought of a particularly horrible way of killing him. One day Narcissus caught sight of his own reflection in the water. Oh, he became so passionately devoted to this image that nothing could tear him away from it. Zeus had caused Narcissus to fall in love with his own reflection. Narcissus died, transfixed by infatuation with his own image.
Although Artemis was a benign enough goddess in her protection of nature, when it came to the protection of her own prudery, she could be absolutely ferocious. On one occasion, a youth named Actaeon chanced on her bathing naked. To prevent him from telling his friends that he had actually seen her in the nude, Artemis changed him into a stag and had him torn to pieces by his own pack of hunting dogs.
When Artemis was weary of the hunt, she would bathe in the forest pools, screened from view by her companions. The virgin goddess had neither time nor thought for love.
When keeping mythological time, it's easy to be transported from one place to another. And this fast-flowing river near the shrines of Olympia is named after the river god, Alpheus.
The myths declared Alpheus to be the son of the ocean, possessed of overwhelming power. He received incessant offerings and sacrifices from the nervous, and this constant attention went to his head. Believing himself to be irresistible, he wanted nothing more than to seduce the unattainable, Artemis. Alpheus was not stupid. He knew that it wouldn't be easy to persuade Artemis to sleep with him, so he decided to take her by surprise. There was to be a celebration with Artemis and the nymphs as the guests of honor, and this seemed to Alpheus the ideal opportunity. However, the cunning goddess had another idea. She took white clay, which she spread on her face and the faces of her companions. Alpheus arrived ready for action, but seeing all those white faces, he was soon discouraged. It was impossible to distinguish Artemis from the rest. He was forced to retire humiliated, while the nymphs laughed and made fun of him. Nothing outraged Artemis more than cruelty to animals. In such cases, she could be a most vengeful goddess.
Rumor had it that once a tamed bear was wandering around the city of Athens quite normally. A young girl began teasing the animal. The bear attacked the girl, her two brothers took revenge, killed the bear, and then a terrible plague spread throughout the city. The Athenians asked the oracle for advice, and the oracle answered that Artemis had to be appeased.
So the Athenians offered to consecrate their young girls to the goddess.
In honor of Artemis, young girls between the ages of 5 and 10 came to the temple at Brauron to offer themselves to the goddess. The girls were called Arcti, or bears in Greek. Their parents sheepishly followed the girls, making sacrifices in honor of the goddess. A touching reminder of Artemis's special place in the pantheon of the gods. The Trojan War was the main event in Greek mythology. It was much more than an incident, much more than an anecdote. Thousands died over the 10 years of its duration. It caused violent quarrels between the gods and direct conflicts between them and mortals, and a single beautiful woman was the cause of it all.
Remember the Gulf War, that popular television spectacular? Well, for the gods of Olympus, the Trojan War provided similar entertainment for much longer. Comfortably seated in their thrones on top of Olympus, the gods eagerly watched the mortals kill each other, and even laid bets on the outcome.
I have to insist on this confrontation between gods and mortals. In the Greek myths, a number of heroic figures competed with the gods on an equal basis. Mythology does not consider it blasphemous for mortals to challenge the gods. Thrace. This northeastern region of Greece is rich in mythological and historical events. Ares, the god of war, originated from Thrace. He was a leading figure in the Trojan War. His royal palace was situated in this region. Of course, like all other gods, Ares also had a palace on Mount Olympus, but as he had no real friends among the Olympians, he preferred to spend most of the time here. Zeus blamed Hera for Ares' sour and quarrelsome personality. You are my son, but my wife gave birth to you. From her you have inherited your incredible obstinacy. You are the most hated of the Olympians. Your stone heart thrives on quarrels, battles, wars. If you had a less important father, you'd be among the lowest of the Olympians.
Zeus failed to mention that Ares had inherited at least one trait from his father, a passion for female beauty. As his mistress, Ares was lucky enough to have the most beautiful woman in all of creation, Aphrodite.
It was in Thrace that Ares and Aphrodite pursued their amorous escapades, and it was there that the god Helios, the sun, spotted them. He reported the adultery to Aphrodite's husband Hephaestus. Hephaestus ambushed the two lovers in bed and trapped them in an invisible net. Apparently, Aphrodite was not alone in her fondness for the god of war. Hades, the king of the underworld, entertained a certain respect for Ares, since as the god of war he provided the kingdom of death with an abundant supply of freshly slain young soldiers.
The Olympians clearly disliked this violent and boorish god, considered him a total outsider. But to be fair, we should point out that Ares was not the only one responsible for the quarrels and fights among the gods. There was also a particularly nasty and erratic goddess named ERIS. She caused nothing but trouble. In Greek, her very name, ERIS, means discord.
On Mount Olympus, if Eris entered a room, bickering and quarrels immediately broke out. Some claim that Eris was the sister of Ares. Whatever the truth, the two of them together were lethal and inseparable.
What is even worse is that Eris had offspring, and just listen to their names. Ponos, which means pain, Maches, battles, Phoni, meaning murders, Dysnomia, which means anarchy, Limos, meaning famine, and Lethe, meaning oblivion. Eris indeed spawned a tight-knit family.
It must be said that Mount Olympus was hardly ever a haven of peace. Zeus's insatiable appetite for love and his wife's vicious resentment of it hardly created the best climate, to say nothing of the incessant parade of illegitimate children. And as a consequence, there were often conspiracies against Zeus, a sort of endless mutiny led by his wife Hera, who else, and her accomplices Poseidon and Apollo. Zeus is an intolerable tyrant. He must be overthrown. And as Zeus slept, the conspirators leapt on him and tied him down by 100 knots. While the plotters were busy deciding who would take over, Thetis, the water deity, came to Zeus's aid. She fetched the 100-handed Briareus, and he promptly untied the 100 knots and released Zeus.
As a punishment, Zeus banished Poseidon and Apollo to Troy. Poseidon was forced to help build the walls of the city, and Apollo was consigned to tending the local king's oxen.
As for Hera, Zeus attached an anvil to each of her ankles, bound her hands with golden handcuffs, and suspended her from the sky. The cult of Hera, Zeus's long-suffering wife, was centered here in the Peloponnese. A temple was dedicated to the goddess, whom the local people honored and worshipped. The ancient Greeks respected Hera, but they were scared of her too. For example, the gruesome death of Dionysus's mother, Semele, was caused by Hera's jealousy. And Leto's prolonged suffering when she was giving birth to Apollo was entirely due to Hera entrapping Aletheia, goddess of labor, on Olympus. She even banished her own son Hephaestus because he was lame and ugly. And Hera had a particular dislike for the renowned hero Hercules, another of Zeus's illegitimate offspring. Behind all these conflicts was Eris, sowing the seeds of discontent. Exhausted by the constant fights, on one occasion Hera decided to leave her husband. To entice her back, Zeus came up with an ingenious stratagem. he created a statue, put a veil over it, and paraded it round in a chariot, spreading the rumor that this was his new fiancée, soon to be his wife. Hearing this, Hera rushed back and attacked the statue, intending to tear her rival to pieces. Once again, we can imagine Eris in the background. No wonder everyone on Mount Olympus disliked Eris and avoided her company. Her masterpiece, however, the provocation which made her famous, was the conflict that began with the golden apple. It all began like this. Thetis, the water deity who saved Zeus from the plotters, was the most beautiful of the Nereids. She was the daughter of a very old and respected deity called Nereus, who was known as the Old Man of the Sea. Nereus had 50 daughters, and it was said that when the sea was calm, one could catch a glimpse of the pretty girls wandering around and playing in the blue water. Zeus was attracted to Thetis, and so was Poseidon. Both wanted to marry her. Poseidon, the god of the seas, thought he, as god of all water divinities, deserved priority. Zeus, however, wouldn't allow anyone to challenge his authority. The impasse was solved when the wise goddess Themis reminded the suitors of an old prophecy, that when the beautiful Thetis gave birth to a son, he would become more powerful than his father.
It was not an appetizing prospect, so Zeus decided that neither he nor anyone else in Olympus would marry Thetis. Instead, he would marry her off to a mortal called Peleus, the king of Thessaly. Thetis was absolutely furious and humiliated. "This is outrageous," she said. "And to compel me, a beautiful and talented goddess, to marry a humble mortal, even if he is a king?" She tried to escape from her future husband by turning herself into a fire, a water lion, and finally a serpent. Alas, it was all in vain, since she wasn't really gifted at disguise. "All right, that's enough," said Zeus. In order to console her, he promised Thetis the most splendid wedding ever.
The ceremony took place on Mount Pelion in Thessaly, an exceptionally beautiful sight. All the gods and many eminent mortals were invited. They brought precious gifts. Everybody wished the newlyweds eternal happiness.
I said that all the gods were invited, but in fact, there was actually one goddess who was not invited. Yes, Eris, of course. However, she wouldn't be kept out of such a major celebration, and here we come to the story of the famous golden apple. Eris made an unexpected entrance. Everyone turned, surprised to see her there. Eris merely tossed an apple among the guests and left without explanation. Inscribed on the golden apple were the words, "the fairest of all." Oh, Aphrodite, Hera, and Athene immediately began to quarrel over who matched the description best. No god was foolish enough to volunteer to judge which of the ladies was the fairest of all. And so Zeus commanded Paris, Prince of Troy, to undertake this risky task. Paris selected Aphrodite, who had promised Paris that he would have the most beautiful woman on earth if she won. Paris subsequently chose Helen, who was married to the king of Sparta. Ares, the god of war, congratulated Eris.
That was very well done, my dear. We shall now enjoy a war that'll last, at least 10 years.
King Agamemnon was the leader of the Greek expedition against the Trojans, and this imposing monument was said to be his tomb. It was here that Agamemnon received an urgent visit from his brother Menelaus, king of Sparta, with the news that his beautiful wife had been abducted by Paris. That meant real trouble, not only for the deceived husband, but also for all the kings of Greece and their soldiers. It meant even more trouble for Paris's father, King Priamus of Troy, and his subjects. They were eventually to suffer the most dreadful punishment. Thus, the Trojan War began.
The Trojan War is the epic to end all epics. However, I don't intend to chronicle all of the events of the 10 years of conflict. The incidents are just too numerous, and it's awfully difficult to keep track of them. Homer, after all, wrote 15,692 verses in the Iliad to describe the war, and even that was hardly adequate. The Iliad begins with a famous quarrel between Agamemnon and the bravest of the Greek heroes, Achilles. It was that crucial moment when Achilles withdrew from the battle. He was in conflict with his fellow Greeks, and anyway fed up with fighting the Trojans.
Achilles was the son of the goddess Thetis. His mother had tried to make him an immortal like herself by laying his body on a fire and afterwards rubbing it with ambrosia. However, his ankle bone had escaped this treatment. Thus it was that Achilles' heel remained mortal. This vulnerable point was enough to doom him during the final days of the Trojan War. Thetis ran to Zeus. "My respects to you, almighty king of gods and mortals. It's certainly not in my interest to disrupt your divine serenity, but I believe you owe me a small favor." In an attempt to save her son, Thetis asked Zeus to punish the Greeks by turning the balance of the war in favor of the Trojans. Zeus knew that the group of gods supporting the Greeks was the more effective one. So to permit the Trojans to win some victories, he gave strict orders that no god be allowed to interfere with the war. "But it's my job to interfere in wars," protested Ares. Poseidon, following the events from the islands of Samothrace, was angered by the Greek losses. He devised a plan to reverse the situation.
Meanwhile, Hera called Hypnos, the deity who induces sleep, persuaded him to be her accomplice, and putting Poseidon's plan into action, made herself look ravishing. Zeus was enraptured by his wife's appearance, and overwhelmed with desire for her. He enfolded the top of the mountain in a golden cloud, so that they could make love in total privacy. He was seduced by Hera's caresses, as if he were in bed with her for the first time. Exhausted by many hours of love, Zeus fell into a deep sleep. Hypnos chose this moment to slip into the room and to finally hypnotize him. When Zeus woke up and saw that the Greeks were winning, he was outraged that his edict was being ignored and realized that he'd been tricked by Hera. He was about to strike with his thunderbolt, but for the first time in his life, Zeus contained his anger. From Mount Olympus, Zeus announced a new edict. "Dear Olympians, concerning the delicate matter of the Trojan War, everybody is now free to act according to his or her conscience. This is my final edict."
pacifying edict from Zeus had the effect of exacerbating the animosities of the gods, who had their own loyalties. Hera, Poseidon, Hermes, Hephaestus, and Athene were pro-Greek. Apollo, Artemis, and Aphrodite pro-Trojan. And there was the usual duplicity, of course. Ares had promised his mother Hera that he was on the side of the Greeks just before he joined the Trojans. Hera appealed to Zeus, presenting herself as the good and obedient wife. Almighty husband, will you be angry if I sent Ares away from the battlefield by wounding him? She asked humbly. No, by all means, no. Send Athene to the battlefield, for she knows how to deal with him. Athene, the goddess of wisdom, Ares' stepsister, hated him and all his violence. She rushed to the scene of the battle wearing Hades' magical helmet that made her invisible, and stood by the Greek warrior Diomedes, giving him her strength. A terrifying struggle took place. As Homer described it, the god of war, thirsty for blood, throws his copper spear. Athene, invisible to Ares, diverts it, and it hits the ground. Diomedes throws his spear. With Athene's guidance, it finds Ares and nails his ribs. Oh, the god of war lets out a yell so loud that both Greeks and Trojans are terrified. It is as if 10,000 soldiers scream in pain simultaneously. Ares left the battlefield and complained bitterly to Zeus about Hera's behavior. Zeus nodded away and sent for a doctor to tend Ares' wounds. Meanwhile, with Eris stirring up trouble among friend and foe alike, the Trojan War reached its climax. As we all know, it was eventually won by the Greeks, and by a mean trick. The gift of a wooden horse filled with heavily armed commanders. For the gods, wars and conflicts began even before they established their dynasty on Mount Olympus. In the very earliest times, there were furious battles against the Titans and the giants, those creatures huge as mountains who threatened to destroy the gods.
The famous battles against the giants ended with the total victory of the Olympians. Why? Well, the gods managed to eliminate Eris's fractious influence. For once, there were no quarrels among the gods. This is, of course, a myth, but it's also true for the deeds of the ancient Greeks. Wherever Eris was absent, the Greeks were capable of miracles.
So these were the gods created by mortals a long, long time ago. The ancient Greeks created the gods in their own image, but made them immortal. They were not perfect, but rather projections of mankind into a world of fantasy where everything is possible. There was no guilt or sense of sin attached to this vision. Man has always been able to distinguish good from evil by instinct. But he needed more than mere morality in the creation of order and of beauty. Imagination, hence the gods. In the beginning there was chaos. En archi into chaos.